Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined this week by Chris Simmons from Indiana SRN. You've heard him before on the show. Real quick before we get into things, the reason why Chris is joining us this week is because B. Scott is having some more issues within his family. I don't want to, I don't know how much he wants me to give detail-wise, so I'll keep that under wraps. But prayers go out to him and his family. Right now they're going through some tough times. So he stepped away for at least this week, so hopefully everything turns out well. But Chris, happy to have you on, especially because we're going to be talking about some baseball on a very important day for us as baseball fans. We're both Cubs fans, and of course, if you couldn't tell, four years ago, this past week, is it today?
Today,
yeah,
second.
Yeah, the Cubs.
Second into the third. It was.
Gotcha.
We get to celebrate it for 2 days. It's a
right.
2-day celebration.
Yeah, dude, a day with the Cubs winning the World Series, a day where literally I came home from work after the Cubs were already leading because I was at work when Dexter Fowler hit the leadoff home run. I sat down on the couch in my living room, and I did not let myself get up from that spot until the final out was recorded, and a lot of emotions poured out over the next 5 hours.
So that day, obviously super special day for me and for generations of Cubs fans. I was also working that night. I had to work until 11 that night. Could not get off. Tried to leave early. Your wife actually would not let me leave early because it would have left her by herself. So it's fine. I'm definitely still not holding a grudge. It's okay. I took my lunch super duper late to at least watch the first hour of the game on my phone at work. So I'm sitting in Subway at work when Dexter Fowler hits the leadoff home run. Yeah. And I'm screaming in Subway, and everyone is like, there was two reactions. There was what the hell's going on, and what happened in the game. Like a lot of people knew obviously what was going on and knew that I was a big Cubs fan. So they're like, wait, what happened? Fowler leadoff shot, and then I come home I'm literally sitting in the car in the parking lot, still watching the game on my phone because I wasn't driving. I didn't drive and watch the game.
Why not?
Because
you call yourself a true fan.
So I'm trying to stay alive to see them win, and I'm sitting in the parking lot in the bottom of the 8th inning, and I watch because I just seen Brandon Guyer double and close the gap a little bit, and I was like, okay, Chapman's gonna get out of it. He's still got 2 outs. He's already got 2 outs, like it's fine. And I'm sitting in the driveway in the passenger seat, and Raji Davis hits that just rocket line drive down the left field line that just hits the camera. I'll never forget seeing that ball hit the camera basically, and the camera go do a full 360, tie the game up. And I just, felt so deflated for a moment. And then, it was just like, well, it's still a tie game. Like, get out of the inning. Like, we're going to be okay. And sure enough, went inside, went up to my room, got through the game on, and was able to sit there and not move until, through that whole 9th and 10th inning. Basically, that the cartoon nail-biting, chattering the whole time for about half an hour, 45 minutes there. Didn't move during the 17-minute rain delay either. But, super fun day, super crazy day. We'll obviously never, ever forget that one. Super special.
Well, and, last week, a week ago from today when this podcast comes out, because, obviously if you're listening to it on the audio version, it's Tuesday. A week ago from Tuesday, was a special night for Dodgers fans. The Dodgers win the 2020 World Series. They were 43-17 on the year. Rays were 40-20, both number 1 seeds. So, B. Scott and I talked about it, and you and I had talked about it a few times. Like, oh, what's going to happen in a shortened season? Are we going to get, the Giants and the Blue Jays and, whatever? And instead, are not only two teams that were the 2 best teams this season, but also were 2 of the best teams from, Dodgers have been one of the best teams in the league for a while, and the Rays have had a couple of great seasons here even before 2020. So, the Dodgers take Game 1, 8-3. The Rays win Game 2. Blake Snell pitches really well. That will come back later in the series as well. Dodgers win Game 3. Look to be in the driver's seat to take a 3-1 series lead, but then one of the craziest finishes in World Series history happens where Brett Phillips, former Brewer, so I know that makes Chris happy. He hits a single that is bobbled by Chris Taylor. Randy Arozarena is sent around third. He stumbles, but the throw is the throw is a little like a kind of lame duck throw from Muncy, and then Will Smith tries to make like a swipe tag, misses the tag, loses the ball. And Arozarena scores, and the Rays tie the series up. If you want to see a breakdown of that, John Boy, one of the guys that I follow on YouTube and social media, you should go check him out. He has a pretty good breakdown of it, where it kind of goes like event by event in that last finishing play. But that ties the series up. Honestly, thought at that point that might have been a big blow for the Dodgers, because mean, how do you not? I mean, here we go again. Because last year, I mean, they were on track to be the same thing, where they were on track to be a World Series team, and then they run into the Cinderella Nationals. They ran into a buzzsaw of the Red Sox. They ran into the cheating Astros. So. Here we go again, another thing that's stacked against us, but they rally. They win game 5, 4-2, and then in game 6, they end up winning 3-1. The big controversy was Blake Snell being pulled after 73 pitches. Another thing that I watched in a John Boy video was the fact that, because obviously the move stinks because Snell was pitching well, and yes, you had Mookie Betts coming up, but actually Mookie Betts was worse. Not only worse the third time through the order, which is why they pulled Snell, because analytics, third time through the order, you got to pull your starting pitcher.
Yep.
But Blake Snell was not that much worse second to third time through the order, and Mookie Betts actually gets worse the more he sees a pitcher, and is worse against left-handed pitchers than he was against right-handed pitchers, who they brought in a righty, Nick Anderson, who's been bad all postseason, or at least the last 2 rounds. And he ends up giving up a hit, ends up blowing up for the Dodgers, or blowing up for the Rays, and that's what kind of put the final kind of nail in the coffin. Yeah. Julio Urias finishes, who I've been a big fan of, finishes off the last 2 1/3 innings. And Corey Seager wins the MVP. He went 8 for 20 with 2 home runs, 5 RBI, a 400 average, 6 walks. The person I'm, especially excited for is Clayton Kershaw, because we've equated to him a lot of times as the Peyton Manning of baseball, where like he's got all this regular season stuff. He's clearly one of the best ever, just doesn't have that little notch under his belt. And he finally gets a win. He had a good postseason, too. He had a good World Series. He went 11 2/3 innings, which equates to a 2.31 ERA, 14 strikeouts to just 3 walks. So Clayton Kershaw pitched a phenomenal World Series. Finally gets his ring. Very excited for that. I thought it was a fun World Series. It never really felt in doubt. I was more concerned for both teams, really. Especially for the Dodgers, I was more concerned when they went down 3-1 to the Braves than I ever felt at any point during that postseason or during that World Series, because even with as devastating of a blow as Game 2 was, or Game 4 was, with the crazy walk-off finish, they still came back strong and came out swinging out of the gate, because I think they led like from the very beginning in that Game 5.
In Game 5, I think they scored 2 or 3 in the top of the first, or
right.
bottom of the first, whatever it was.
Right.
Justin Turner hit that solo leadoff shot, and that absolutely, reminiscent of Dexter Fowler when he did for the Cubs, when he would lead off with a hit or obviously a home run. It revitalizes the whole team right out of the gate and gives them that second win. Seems crazy to think about in the first inning, but that's what it does.
Right. So, so it kind of set the tone that, hey, the Dodgers aren't going to miss a beat here. Yeah. Even though the series was technically close, and I'm glad that it went 6, it was a fun World Series to watch, but it just never felt like, because, throughout the whole Astros and Nationals series last year, you never really thought, or you never had one way or the other a feeling with the Astros or Nationals were going to win. Kind of reminded me a little bit of the Red Sox and the Dodgers, where even though in that series I wanted the Dodgers to win too, and don't tell B Scott that. But even though I wanted them to win, it still never felt like they really stood a chance against that Red Sox team.
Yeah, that Red Sox team is I mean, I don't know who. I mean, maybe not all time, but I don't know who you're gonna put up against them to beat them in a 7-game series.
Real quick, pop quiz. We know Mookie Betts was on both the 2018 and 2020 2018 Red Sox 2020 Dodgers World Series champions. Who is the other member of that 2018 team? Actually, there's 2 other members of that 2018 Red Sox team that won a World Series with the Dodgers this year.
Yeah.
Can you name them?
See. I probably can't. Let's see. Probably going to be some obscure pitcher, the bullpen pitcher that I have no, I can't think of who it is.
Joe Kelly and David Price.
Oh, David Price for sure. Okay, yeah.
In the Mookie trade, and
then Joe Kelly came along. You're right.
Yeah, so
very cool, very cool.
Yeah, and it also the move to take out Blake Snell, like that kind of also reminds me of Game 7 of last year's World Series where Greinke was rolling. They took him out, and then they brought in Will Smith, who also was or Will Harris, who also had been having some struggles through the postseason. So
he's the one that gave up the shot to Kendrick, right?
Right, but just the fact that why are they going to Will Harris? He struggled all postseason. You have Cole, who literally had gone to the bullpen.
Yep.
Why did they make that specific move? So
it as like you said, when you're talking about this year and that Snell move, it all boils down to the analytics and the numbers now, which is a good thing, but obviously not a perfect science, as sports in general keeps proving you. I mean, sports are never going to get boiled down. That's kind of the beauty of them. They're never going to get boiled down to, well, if you make this decision, here's the outcome 100% of the time.
Right.
It's not going to be like that. So,
right.
I mean...
And it's kind of going to be what we talk about actually later when we talk a little bit about the Colts, in the sense that sometimes you have to even if you don't typically do something, sometimes you just have to go with your gut and go with what you're seeing in front of you. So yes, obviously, it is. I don't think anyone. It's kind of like with, again, going back to Greinke the year prior. It's kind of like no one would have faulted AJ Hinch with leaving in Zach Greinke in Game 6 or Game 7 last year. Just no one would have faulted Blake's. If Kevin Cash had been all right, you get Mookie, and if you can't get Mookie out, then you're done.
Right.
Then that makes a little bit more sense than, that still I think is more passable than we're not even going to let you see Mookie. Yeah. Whatever. And so sometimes you just got to kind of take that chance. And just because it's something you don't typically do doesn't mean it's something you should never do.
Yeah, and I think baseball, more than any other sport, I've said it before, I'll say it again, is absolutely, when you look at it, it's such a reactionary when you talk about it. Well, of course, it was the wrong decision to pull Snell because it didn't work out.
Right.
Whereas if they had pulled Snell and whoever they brought in got out of it, well, it's the right move then. That's not how you look at it or I look at it when we talk about things, even just off the air in general. We're very, I don't think it was the right decision, even if it worked out. They got lucky. It shouldn't have worked out or whatever. Or they made the right decision. Sometimes, the baseball just, it happens. You roll with it. So that's the thing. The biggest reason I have a problem with the pulling of Snell in Game 6 is I had a problem with it as soon as it happened.
Right.
Before Mookie did what he did and everything happened, I said, no, it's not the right move. I understand, you're essentially in a Game 7. You can't make a mistake. And, well, what if my guy's rattled and I can't leave him in too long? Yeah, but you pulled him too short. You didn't leave him in there long enough.
Yeah.
I felt in the moment, and then, not that I felt vindicated that I was right.
Right.
Because I was pulling for the Rays.
Right.
But that's one of those that, I'm saying it was a bad decision now because I said it when it happened before the results came out.
And Snell had already shown you earlier in this World Series that he can pitch well against it, because he pitched really well for only pitching 4 1/3 innings. He pitched really well in Game 2 as well.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of crazy how it all works out. But yeah, Snell pitched really well. And you think about it, him, Blake Snell, and Charlie Morton, and Tyler Glasnow has shown a little bit more, but those are your main guys. Those are your main starting pitchers. Not like you threw out, one of your your openers.
Yeah, exactly.
And he, gave up a hit in the first. You're oh wait, gotta pull him.
Go.
Yeah, you literally those were one of your guys that you're banking on. And then the thing that kind of is not great for the Rays is I don't know how well that bodes for them keeping him, long term.
How is he sitting here feeling right now? Even he's still a week later. Yeah, and and it's one of those things where, you pull Snell early because, well, he only given up 2 hits. I mean, he threw 73 pitches, and like you mentioned, he's one of, if not that team's ace. And sometimes, I mean, I'm still of the belief where, and I know that the kind of mindset is changing, and maybe that does make me a little bit feel old school or a little older now. But hey, sometimes like you got to ride with your starter. If you lose, you're okay losing because they got to your ace.
Right.
Don't let them beat your bullpen. Like if they're gonna beat you, make them go through your guy. Make your ace give up 3 or 4 runs before And now it's. I mean, now it's first sign of trouble. I got to get him out of there, which it more often than not does not work out. It feels like so. It's one of those where you wish. Obviously, Snell wishes he had stayed in. Obviously, Rays fans were wondering what if. You never know. And I mean, it's just one of those things where, in general, like I said, he's your ace. You got to ride with him until he gives up the lead. Until he gives up that big hit, like you have to give him a chance to get out of the inning.
I would have been okay if Mookie was the last hitter he saw.
Yeah.
Like, if they were, or if they judged whether or not they're going to pull him by how he did against Mookie. If he gives up the hit to Mookie, I can understand pulling him out.
Sure. I was going to say, the other thing I don't like, generally speaking, obviously there are exceptions to the rule. The other thing I don't like is pulling a starting pitcher when theoretically one pitch can get him out of the inning. So if he can get a double play ball and get out of the inning, cool, then you're good. If it's 2 outs, obviously you can get out of the inning. So if you're in a situation like that, I really am never a fan of pulling the starter in that situation because you're theoretically one pitch away from, who cares how crazy that half inning was, we wiped it away, you got a fresh start next inning, let's see how that goes. Easy peasy.
And what's crazy too is that like even though like so for this season, as we kind of transition to more of a recap of what the season was, and just a reminder, you can follow us at Crash Course FM, Crash Course Pod on Twitter, Crash Course Podcast on YouTube. We're starting to put out more of kind of just our segments, standalone segments. Have an episode of Memory Lane coming up on Friday, so make sure you tune into that. Make sure if you're listening to the audio version, make sure you go over to Facebook because we stream the podcast live every Monday night at 8 o'clock, so make sure you tune into that. Crash Course Podcast on Facebook, and then remember you can listen to us every week. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard, you can hear the Crash Course Podcast. So, admittedly this season, I wasn't as locked in as I would have been for normal seasons.
Sure.
And I think I kind of figured out why. And it's not because like I wasn't excited for baseball to be back and wasn't excited for all the stupid labor negotiations to be done.
Yes.
It was more of the fact that like I think when a season, there wasn't enough time, as odd enough as it sounds, there wasn't enough time to get invested in the different teams because there were a lot of players like even on the Cubs that I knew of them, but like didn't even like, oh, that guy's on the team this year, and or I didn't, who the heck is this guy? Mm-hmm. And typically that's not at least even if I have a thought about that guy early in the season, I'm more invested in them as the year goes on, and also the fact that they started at like so late in the actual calendar year, because typically once April and like the NCAA tournament is done, it's usually just baseball that I'm watching if I'm watching a game. Yeah. With the exception of of an occasional NBA playoff game or the NBA finals, typically watching baseball. So because you weren't watching baseball in April, May, June, and July, because usually once it gets past the All-Star break and the trade deadline, that's when I start looking more at football and other things are starting to gear up. Yeah. And that's and plus this year at the end of July you had the Pacers doing what they were doing, in the bubble, and obviously they didn't play that well against the Heat. You had that playoff series to kind of be more invested in, so there was more going on because things were starting to pick back up again because things were restarting, so baseball didn't have the spotlight. But I did feel after the World Series was over, I was like, man, I miss baseball, even though it was like that 2 month little kind of you almost feel like I was getting amped up like I normally would after watching 3 months of baseball, and then it's over.
That was the thing. The weird thing when even if you take all of the other factors of the NBA restart and the NFL having the question marks up in the air at the time, what is their season going to look like? Is it going to be altered at all? Well, if you take all of that aside for a moment and just look at what baseball gave you, was a 60-game year when you're used to 162. Right. So basically, when you start on game 1, I mean, by the time a month goes by and you start getting invested, you start seeing, who's the division leader. You start seeing the stuff start to form. All of a sudden, You got to flip that switch, and boom, you're in playoff mode. It's win now for teams. You've got teams that are right there on the fringe, even with the expanded playoffs. I mean, so as soon as the season starts to take shape, it's the regular season's basically done, and you're down to your last 14 games or whatever it is to kind of sort out seeding and everything. So it really is, so different. And then obviously you add in all the other factors, as you mentioned, of the NBA restart being so late in the calendar year as well, and going on at the same time that you're trying to figure out what baseball is going to be and start baseball and get baseball started, and then it's going. So it all is, I mean, obviously just like everything else in the world in 2020, it was weird. Yeah. It was the same but different. It makes like 2020 has just been kind of, in one GIF nutshell, that one of my favorite ones with James Franco, where he's like same but different, yeah. But still same. You're like, well, it's baseball. Right. It's not, it's not 162 games. So yeah, I mean, by the time the regular season shaped up, it was over, and we're in the playoff hunt. And then playoffs are ready, and our Cubs go back-to-back days. Well, they had a postponed game, yeah. So they lasted for a third day. But in a span of 72 hours, we went from, hey, 0-0 series, let's go get it. And 72 hours later, they're done. Yeah.
Dude, when I tell you, I was so, nervous and also just disappointed and sad, because in that span of time as well, I had done the podcast for the playoff prediction. So my World Series prediction was Padres Twins. Yep. And then I also had the Padres and Cubs in the NLCS. Yep. So I was like, the Padres had gone down 2-0 in their series. The Cubs had lost, and the Twins had got swept as well. So I was like, oh, cool. So you know what? I decided to go off because I originally had Dodgers-Yankees when the year started, or when the season started. And then I was like, okay, cool. I'm glad that literally in the span of a weekend, my teams are all out. Yeah. So thank goodness, I guess the Padres punched back and won their series. And
well, for a lot of reasons. No one wanted to see the Cardinals win.
Yeah, true.
Nobody
has ever wanted to see Cardinals win a series.
At all.
But yeah, I mean, it was a fun year. You had the White Sox and the Padres make big steps forward.
It was so much fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to see what the Padres can do, because if this offseason, and that's going to be a topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
If the offseason is at least a semi-normal offseason, it will be interesting to see what the Padres do, and it's already has been interesting to see what the White Sox have done. Because those are kind of the big teams that can kind of shake things up, especially with the White Sox, in the sense that the Twins don't have a stranglehold on the Central like the Dodgers do on the West. Over, sure. So for the Padres are kind of can contend for that top spot in the West, but still should be a playoff team. Whereas the White Sox are not only a playoff team, but also could be fighting for a division. So that should be fun to watch. Obviously, what we're referring to too is Tony La Russa getting hired, which I found out later that the general manager for the White Sox had a chance to hire La Russa back in the 70s and didn't do it, and now is like, here's my chance. And so we'll see. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But that's definitely an interesting hire for sure.
In the nicest way I can put it, it is an interesting hire.
Yeah.
The main question mark with a Tony La Russa hire in 2020, there's two.
Yeah.
There's the simple fact that he hasn't managed an MLB team in 9 years. I don't care who you are. He hasn't done it in 9 years. A lot's changed in 9 years, even if you take out the 2020 season and the abnormality that it was. A lot's changed in 8 years till 2019. Two, you've got a however old he is guy that, that's how he manages, and he has a bunch of young, really, really young, up-and-coming players to manage.
And that's a point that Trevor Plouffe made, too. He was on Talking Baseball. He said that he was like, we'll kind of know early on, because if he comes through the door and comes up to Tim Anderson and is like, we're not bat flipping this year, we're going to be buttoned up, we're going to be whatever,
right.
Then that's kind of how you're going to know how the Tony La Russa tenure, because is Tony La Russa maybe, I mean, I just don't think he's that much better than Rick Renteria. No. Is Rick Renteria the best manager ever? No, but is he better than Tony La Russa? Probably, especially now, probably a little bit more even than maybe it was, in 2011 when he was last managing.
Renteria was there for a year, right?
No, he's been there.
Was he there for a while?
He was there for a while because he was only with the Cubs
for a year. That's where I was trying. I was going to make a fun little comparison because obviously he was with the Cubs before Joe Madden came in, and then in 2 years Madden won it all. And so how does Rick Renteria feel getting replaced by an all-time great who takes that core to a World Series? Then only to go to the other side of town, have another really young core that is really up and coming, looks really good, to then get the rug taken out from underneath him again, to get shown the door, replaced by, again, an all-time great. Who knows where he'll take them. It's gotta feel pretty interesting if you're Rick Renteria.
Oh yeah, definitely definitely stinks to be, the manager that gets, the rebuild, but not like the fruits of that rebuild.
Yeah.
That kind of...
Well, I mean, switching to football, I mean, it's Tony Dungy down in Tampa.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he got it here in Indy, thank gosh, but, that was an interesting one too. But yeah, so White Sox have a big, very important offseason. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on them. They're a lot of fun. They have a lot of talent and a lot of really fun guys who I think are part of that mold to change the game to what the up and coming, the younger generation, the new generation is going to make it look like with the Tim Andersons, even the Yohan Moncadas, the Eloy Jimenez's, the Luis Roberts, obviously, and I got a White Sox buddy who is just salivating at the mouth, even at their farm system still coming up. He told me, I think his name's Andrew Vaughn. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's Andrew Vaughn. He's like, he might be the best hitter on that White Sox team, and I'm including everybody that's there now. He's like, he may be the best. He has the highest ceiling of anybody, and he's just coming up through the pipeline now. So they've got a lot to look forward to.
Them and the Padres. I feel like if they can both add some pitching this offseason, and maybe a bat or two, maybe a low key signing, maybe a veteran bat on both sides. Maybe, but both teams, I think they just need to improve their pitching staffs. Because
that's the one I agree. Because the Padres, I think, are like a 99% complete roster.
Yeah.
Outside of some pitching help for sure.
Yeah, because I forgot all about Chris Paddock, but I think he was injured for part of the year. They have Mike Clevenger. They've got Dinelson Lamet.
I was gonna say they did bring Clevenger in. Yeah.
If Kirby Yates can find it, again next year. They should be in pretty good shape. So yeah, I'm interested to see what both those teams do. And of course, they had a great year from Jose Abreu, who had 19 home runs. He was second in the league in homers. He led the league in RBI. On the other side of it, we could talk about some pitching a little bit. Darvish and Shane Bieber have breakout years. Really excited to see Darvish break through. Both were fun for separate reasons. Bieber was fun because when he won the All-Star game, I had no idea who he was.
Yeah.
When he was the winning pitcher for the All-Star game, I had no idea who he was.
Yep.
And then from that point until now, he has been one of the best pitchers in the game. And then you have Darvish, who has taken a lot of crap over the years for not pitching well. And even when he has pitched well, it seems like the Cubs could never get him wins.
Oh my gosh!
And finally, everything kind of comes together. And even though the Cubs didn't get to where they wanted to go, he still was a breakout pitcher, had a fantastic year, and I'm really excited to see what he can do moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as a Cubs fan, obviously I'll talk all day about Darvish and the year that he had because, I mean, even putting my Cubs fandom aside, as you mentioned, he's taken so much crap, not even just from Cubs fans, but over the years. I mean, I felt like I feel like he has just always kind of been looked at as, he was supposed to be this great superstar pitcher, and he hasn't lived up to that, even though pretty much every eye test and number will back up that he is, in fact, an elite ace superstar, whatever arbitrary label you want to call him. He's absolutely been that, but of course fans still see, for whatever reason or another, they don't think of him in that way, and it's not fair to him. He's definitely done his job, and I know he had a rough first year in Chicago, but he's definitely... flip that around, and this year was really, really nice, as you mentioned, to see him kind of put it all together and do it with the best hair I've seen in baseball in a while and a big old smile on his face. It was great to see him do it while having fun.
Yeah. Well, and I think this was a great year. You kind of, giving some a little bit of backstory. I think... Because when he got traded to the Dodgers, he was pitching very well.
Yeah.
When he got traded to the Dodgers back in 2017, I think was the year he got traded. He even had a great NLCS against the Cubs.
Yeah.
And I think what's followed him around, especially up to this year, is that Game 7 where he pitched where, he may have been tipping pitches, but also remember the Astros were cheating. There's two pitchers from that Dodgers team that have gotten bad raps. One of them just won the World Series this year in Clayton Kershaw because... Yep. Of the fact that, and I even, one of our buddies, Sean Kroll at Indiana SRN, was saying that the Yankees have just as much of a gripe with the Astros as, and it's like, yeah, that's true, but Clayton Kershaw was having a solid postseason until Game 5, when the craziest game ever was played, where the Astros won 13 to 12.
It was something stupid. It was
12
double
innings.
digit. It was, yeah.
But Kershaw, I think he had one outing where he gave up like 3 or 4 runs, but the rest of that postseason, that was the postseason he was turning it around.
Yep.
And then he gets rocked by the Astros who were cheating. Darvish had this bad connotation of because he had a bad World Series against the Astros who were cheating, where you can never truly say no, Darvish was bad, he wasn't playing well. But there's also going to be that little bit of doubt where you feel cheated, and then you also, so he's been trying to get back from that, especially, and then you have the especially since then he hadn't pitched well up until this year, and then you also have the stuff in the offseason with Christian Yelich, where he's where after the whole Astros thing, they start looking at other teams that may have been stealing signs, and then Christian Yelich goes and says, well, no one needs to steal signs off you Darvish, people can just hit you all the time, and then he goes out and shuts everybody up this year. So it was good to see him finally have that breakout year, and I think that's the Darvish we're going to see going forward. I don't think we're hopefully,
fingers crossed, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, because he was the way he did it was so confident and easy that I don't think it was a flash in the pan. He just he found the magic and who knows if he can do it again. Yeah. I think he did it so confidently and made it look so easy that he is that dominant. And like we said, he's kind of always been that, but a couple of bad outings have just kind of followed him. And in sports in general, it's there's always that one moment that that's his whole career until it changes, or until he can eclipse it. And it's just it's not fair for anybody, but it really was not fair for Darvish, who has been nothing but stellar and above since he's come over to the major leagues.
Yeah, and then there's we mentioned the Yankees. More disappointing finishes for the Yankees and the Braves. The Yankees, I don't know how they get over the hump. I mean, they faced a good Rays team. Yeah. They have still the best bullpen, in my opinion, in baseball with Britton and Aroldis Chapman. This year they actually were doing better about not just being a home run or bust team. Sure. And so that's just kind of a one where you're like, I don't know what we do except for run it back next year. Maybe make some small additions here and there.
But they're the Yankees; they'll spend money.
But then you have the Braves, who what they were lacking was pitching this year. So their bullpen was fine. I feel like their bats are incredible. I think if they can add, I think, long story short, I think the market for Trevor Bauer is going to be really interesting because, if the Braves need pitching and they're a contender, the Padres need pitching, they're a contender, the White Sox need pitching, they're a contender. Wouldn't mind seeing the Cubs get them. Right. There's a lot of teams this year that were playoff teams and maybe had disappointing ends to their season that need pitching. That I think, the pitching market, if they're like I said, who knows what the market's going to look like this year? But I think it's going to be a feeding frenzy for starting pitching because heck, by the end of the year, the Braves pitching staff was just pretty much depleted. They didn't have hardly anybody who they could rely on. How many injuries they dealt with the exception of Max Fried. They were looking to find somebody, and then so disappointing end to the season for those two teams. I think the big standout story from this year were the different rule changes, and some of them brought on due to the COVID aspect of it, and some of them were already instituted. The 3-batter minimum for pitchers coming out of the bullpen, universal DH, which that was brought on because of the shortened season, and then runner on base and second base and extra innings. That was instituted to make sure that we didn't have any 18 inning games when you're trying to get through a 60-game season. And so, I don't recall any of those having really negative impacts. I don't know. I don't think overall, I mean, I'm sure there was
not
some
widespread. Everybody was like, this is horrible.
Yeah, I'm sure there were some teams that were like, well, we wouldn't have lost that game if if the runner hadn't started on second, or maybe if we would have, we didn't have a DH, so we had to put some bat. We didn't, want in the lineup.
And with every rule change, there's going to be pushback.
Right.
I mean, with anything, it's just human nature to push back on change in general. So,
but they definitely could use some tweaks. Now, whether or not those tweaks will happen, because I think the thing that worries me is that I think Rob Manfred thinks that all those adjustments actually are good the way that they are, and he sees no reason to change them, and he also hates baseball. So like, because I was thinking about it, when I was thinking about this podcast, I was like, they should just get rid of the 3 batter minimum, but get rid of mound visits, get rid of the rules for those 2 things, and just give managers kind of like timeouts. Okay. And so whenever you have a mound visit, like a managerial mound visit,
okay,
if the manager comes out of the dugout, you get so many of those a game. Because really, I mean, whenever you make a mid-inning pitching change, which that's what baseball really is trying to get rid of, is all the middle of the inning pitching changes. Right. That's what needs to be regulated. Not when the catcher wants to go talk to the pitcher about what pitches he's going to throw. Not because pitchers are getting taken out or shouldn't be allowed to just face one batter. I think it's if they're trying to regulate how many times the manager comes out, pitching change, throw your 8 warm-up pitches, okay, go out again, change the pitcher again. So, I think if they made it okay, you get 5, it actually adds that strategy back into the game, because if you have all 5, you can do that at the end of the game. Yeah. You can call your timeouts, kind of like what we see in basketball. If you model a little bit more after basketball, where, it's actually strategic, you get 6 timeouts. Sure. You can use them how you want. Yeah. But
obviously the strategy in general, is to hoard them.
Yeah,
sure.
So then, you can use your lefty specialist and then do another thing. So I think that would be a cool way to kind of adjust it and make it less about, we don't want you going to the mound. We don't want you, we want to make you use, because I think the 3 batter minimum hurts the strategy of the game, where that tweak would actually add to the strategy of the game.
I can see that, because definitely what the 3 batter minimum did more than any other thing was it eliminated your what you would call your specialist.
Right.
If you have a guy who just, he doesn't really pitch well to righties, but my goodness, he decimates lefties. Yeah. And you know what? I got a lefty coming up that I cannot give. I can't have him on base. I just need this guy to get him out and move on. Yeah. It gets the 3 batter minimum obviously decimated that role. So I guess I like the 3 batter minimum in general, but I like what you're saying. I like the idea of less mid-inning pitching changes. Yeah. I like the idea
that's the thing that needs to be regulated.
I like the idea of not using 8 or 9 guys in a 9-inning game, or whatever crazy numbers we're getting. So if you just find some way to narrow that down to 5 pitchers a game total, I'm good with that.
You can't really do pitchers just because.
I just mean in general, if you're because that's the number I'm looking at, is like you said, mid-inning pitching changes, but just more pitchers in general. I don't want you to use so many pitchers in a game. It's because then again you're going way more into analytics, and you're way more into the splits and everything like that. And you're looking at all these numbers, and then you're overthinking it. You're making the wrong decisions because you're just looking solely so much into these numbers.
And also, to be clear, don't cut you off, but also to be clear, you can still, if that rule were in place where you only had so many mid-inning pitching changes, if the manager doesn't come out of the dugout, so if it's just a regular pitching change between innings, that wouldn't count.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
So I think I think that would serve as much of a purpose and add more strategy to the game.
But we're good with the universal DH, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
because I love it. I'm not even gonna lie. I've always thought it was just weird that we had that with different leagues, man. I understand the way it was 100 years ago and this and that, but I it's fine. It is what baseball was. I'm totally okay with either both leagues having the DH or both leagues not having it. Yeah. I just want it needs to be the same.
Yeah, I like the strategy of having to the strategy was I did like the strategy side of it for the NL, but I think also what kind of lightened the change for me, especially because I wasn't oh man, this has to stay or I'm gonna get really mad.
Yes.
No, it's I think what helps is the fact that the Cubs have so many hitters.
Right.
So from my team standpoint, because that's why I even told Brandon that I was like. Because he was like, "Oh, I'm surprised an NL guy is for universal DH." I was like, "Well, we have Kyle Schwarber, so that's what I'm. That's what I'm excited to see." So I think in the long run, it's one of those things where you liked it when it was there, but now that it's gone, you don't really miss it. It's not something that I'm gonna be like, "No, we gotta get the pitchers."
The fondness of
because also you want pitchers. There were some pitchers that were good at hitting, and I think you could still there are still instances where they can still hit. There's situations where that's fine, whatever. But But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's a good move. It's like
Sure.
that should stay, and I'm in favor of that staying.
My favorite is some of my coworkers are those older. No, this is the way baseball was, and I don't want the DH in the NL. I'm an NL guy. It's never going to be like they were steadfast. Like I don't want to watch baseball if it's. And then they watched it this year, and they're like, "Yeah, it really wasn't that bad. Like it's fine." And I was like, "Yeah, that's the point. Like it's not this monumental. I mean, I know it's a big change, but it's not this earth-shattering, groundbreaking. Oh, this doesn't even look like baseball anymore."
Right.
Game. So.
And then as far as the runner on second and extra innings, so I think what made it bad, like I think I have a way to fix that too. And like I said, I mean,
good.
Who knows?
I got one too. So
who knows if it actually will ever get heard at all ever? If they'll change it, or if they'll be like see nothing crazy happened over 60 games, so let's just implement this forever. But I think what made it bad was that because there was a runner on second, there was no problem with first guy out is going to bunt, try to get the runner to third. So there was a lot more sacrifices where if you were able to nip that sacrifice in the butt, well, now there's one out and no runners on at all, and you're in the same scenario as a normal extra inning. So the sacrifices got a little bit too crazy. I think there should be this. I think it should kind of work kind of how what you see in soccer, what you see in I think in hockey as well, where and even kind of in football, where you have that extra, like not one extra inning, but I think like that extra period to get it done normally, and then you go to kind of the gimmicky finish.
Sure.
Whereas I think there should be normal extra innings before for the 10th, 11th, and 12th. So 3 innings of normal extra inning baseball.
Okay.
Because most games, looking at the numbers, most extra inning games don't go past the 10th or 11th.
Exactly.
So I'm good with having normal baseball for at least a couple of actual extra innings. But then once you get to the 12th or 13th, and I would like to see 3 regular innings, but if it's 2, it's whatever.
Yeah.
But then I think it should start with a runner on first instead of second to avoid the constant sacrifices. So I think runner on first I can deal with. Runner on second I'm not a huge fan of. I guess it would just be the strategy of the game regardless. But yeah, I'm good. I'm good with the runner on first, starting in like the 12th or 13th inning.
Sure.
And I think that's a perfect way to kind of solve the extra inning problem.
Yeah, actually, that's with a little minor tweak. That's essentially what I was going to say. Was I don't like starting with a runner in scoring position in the 10th because, like you said, you technically don't even have to have you have to have 2 productive at bats, but you don't have to have a hit to score a game breaking run. Right. You just have to lay a bunt down and make solid contact for a fly ball, and you're up 1. Yeah. So I don't like that in the 10th. What my tweak was simply just 10th inning is regular, 11th is runner on first, 12th and beyond, fine. If it goes 12 or more, put them in scoring position because now you've at least had each side has had 2 opportunities to get guys in, and hey, in the 12th inning, like you really need to finish it off because that's when you start. So yeah, I mean if it's the 0, 1, and 2 in the 10th, 11th, and 12th, or if it's yours where it's 0 for 2 or 3 and then move on, I'm totally fine with that. I did not like the starting with a runner on second because it just made it too easy. And I understood why it was needed for this year. As we said, we didn't want super long games in a shortened season. You're trying to just get through these games as efficiently without injury or problems as you can. So you don't need 17, 18 inning marathon games. So that's why I was fine with it for this year. But moving forward, hell no.
Right. And by far one of the biggest changes was, of course, to the playoffs. You go from only 10 teams. A third of the league made the playoffs. Yes. Before. Now there's over half the league making the playoffs, 8 from each side. And I'm not totally against having more teams in the postseason. It's one of those things where, like, as soon as it was the case this year, I was kind of like, okay, it's not the worst thing in the world. What I am kind of the hill I want to die on is that all leagues should not have more than half the league in the postseason.
Okay.
Because it doesn't incentivize winning.
Right.
Instead of like you can make a couple of low-key moves to take a mediocre team, make them just mediocre enough to win 85 games, and you're in the postseason.
Yeah.
And you can spin that and be like, look, I have our team in the playoffs every year. I'm making these, super low-budget moves that I just make bank on as an owner because I don't have to pay.
I'm not paying out more, nearly what I'm getting in.
So, I'm good with, at least at maximum 14 teams, top 7 from each. Because I was going back through it today, I was like, well, the 7th seed for the NL was the Reds.
Yeah.
They weren't. They were a team capable of going further. Because they had the pitching, they had the bats. They just didn't perform.
Yeah.
And then the 7th seed over in the AL, I think that was the Astros. So
who were under 500.
Who were under 500, but also still a team that you would expect to see, because that's the thing. That's the reason why we have even an extra more problem with the cheating, is because they were already a good team, and then they're like, let's cheat, and then they were a great team. So yeah, I mean, so you have some teams that are still in there, but yeah, I was like, the Blue Jays, even though they were a team that could potentially have made some, moves this year, they shouldn't have been in. And then you have the Brewers, who, as good as they've been in the past, and because that's the thing too, like,
again, they were 500.
Yeah, this great run for the Dodgers wouldn't have happened if like just a couple of freak things happened, against the Brewers, and all of a sudden you have a random team that shouldn't really be there. So like, I want to incentivize winning. I want the top half of the league, to make it, and then I want the reason why I'm good with it being at 7 is because I'll give the team that's the best that year a bye to the second round.
Sure.
So then it's still 2v7, 3v6, 4v5.
Exactly.
I'm good with that. So like, I'm not opposed to having expanded playoffs, but definitely, I mean, and that's the problem, is that like the sports world in general, I feel like is really embracing the business side, because now that the players are embracing the business side and being like, I want to go chase my money, you know, and I want to get paid. Now that's how the owners and that kind of, and GMs are approaching it, where they're like, okay, well then we're going to do the thing that makes us the most money, which is get us to the playoffs. We don't care how good or bad we are.
Yeah.
Just get us to the postseason.
Yes.
So it doesn't incentivize winning. It just incentivizes, we made some low budget moves here and there, and it got us to where we want to go. And
I mean, I'll give you the best example of the last 2 years, and is the Boston Red Sox basically crying poor and not wanting to pay Mookie Betts,
right,
and shipping him out to LA because, well, we can shave off a few dollars and still put out a respectable team. And even if we don't, we're the Boston Red Sox. We'll make our money.
Right.
We're a storied franchise that will make our money regardless. So why would we pay this guy who's clearly one of, if not the best players in baseball right now? Why would we pay him what he's worth when we don't have to?
Right.
And that's
Yeah, so I think I'm good with the expanded playoffs, is as long as we like trim the fat a little bit, make it 6 teams, and the first 2 teams get buys, or make it kind of like what the NFL was. And I also am for. I think I'm surprised that hasn't been embraced more. The NFL, what the NFL does as far as like the lowest seed is like plays the highest seed every week until you get down to the end.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan of that. I don't know why more leagues haven't embraced that.
I don't know. Yeah. No, that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're filling out a bracket, like that's kind of how it should be.
So I'm good with that. So you like incentivize the winning end of it. I just don't want to see, because like that's the thing. If you expand, because I'm okay with like an under 500 team as long as it wasn't like a 20-40 team. Like I was okay with an under 500 team in this season where you only had 2 months to get going.
Yeah.
So like, but what I don't want to see is like, a couple of years ago, the AL, I think their 8th seed would have been like a 60-70 win team, and like that team doesn't deserve. Like, do you think that team is like being like, we made? I mean, they're excited, I guess, because they get to play in the postseason. But let's say that team wins 2 games, knocks out the top seed. Well, now a team that actually like is trying to win and is trying to do good by their fan base is now kicked out because another owner was like, well, our team was just good enough to win 70 games, get that 8th seed, and then win 2. And just happened to be lucky enough to win 2 games. So I mean, I just want to see. I want to see less than half of all sports leagues make the playoffs. That's all I want.
And especially when you talk expanded, if you talk about going over half, I mean, at some point you water down making the playoffs so much that it doesn't feel like even that much of an accomplishment. Whereas if it's such short numbers, if it's baseball where it was 10 teams, even if you made the playoffs if you're the Cubs, you won your one World Series, so obviously like that run is a success. I don't care if you only won one, won one. It's still one more than any other regime has won in over a century. But you still made the playoffs every year. You're putting out the best team theoretically you can. And sometimes most years you fell short. Sometimes you lost in the wild card round of the NLCS. But being one of those top 10, like that's an accomplishment in and of itself. But if you're talking about 16, like I said, you can sneak in at under 500 year in and year out and feel like you're on the same level as the Dodgers because we both made the playoffs. Yeah, well, clearly they're a 110 win team and you're an 80 win team.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But yeah, and then, so looking ahead at next year, it's going to be an odd offseason. We've already seen it with some of the managerial hires and like pretty much every team declining options and all that stuff. And I think what's going to be the most telling is football has shown us that fans can be allowed in stadiums. I think for every league, that was any league that did any sort of a bubble this year. So the baseball playoffs, which ended up not being as much of a bubble towards the end,
right?
When they allowed fans in the stands for the World Series, and then also the NBA. Obviously, no full seasons. Like everybody did what they had to do to get through this season,
yes,
and get through the pandemic season. And the next year, it's got to be at least a little bit more normal as far as you're going to see the NBA playing games in their own courts. You're going to see baseball playing again in their own stadiums with fans. Because I think football has shown us that hey, we can have some fans in the stands and we can do it that way. And obviously, the pandemic in some areas is lessened and all that kind of thing, but not in all areas, so still wear a mask. But anyway, just do it. It'll be the fact that they're going to be able to have fans in the stands and be theoretically better off than they were this year. It should show that hey, maybe it's not going to be that big of a deal as far as how they go about spending. Maybe they because theoretically, I was thinking about it today as well. I was like, okay, so let's say you have a third of the fans in the stands.
Right.
So you have a third of the fans in the stands, which means obviously you're making a third of...
It's about 15K, usually. Because I think Wrigley holds somewhere between 45
and
50.
Yeah, so I was like, if you... I think people, especially for this next season, would, for one, be okay with a little bit of a raised ticket price because you're also not going to be going to every game.
Yeah.
It's not like a fan that would normally go, out of 81 games. Now, granted, I think the season will be shortened again. I just don't think it'll be 60 games. Well, we hope. It's not going to be just 60 games. It'll be more along the lines of, I could see, 120, something like that.
Yeah.
But, I think I don't think people will be that opposed to okay, this year, guys, guess what? The jerseys at the stadiums are going to be a little bit more expensive. Concessions are going to be a little bit more expensive.
Yeah.
Ticket prices are going to be a little bit more expensive because we've got to make up at least some of that money.
Yeah.
I would be understanding of that, especially because you're not going to be going to as many games, as you would. On a normal season, you're not, because there's some fans that go, might go to the 10 or 15 games a year. It's going to be more like you see with the NFL, where the standard family can only probably go to, if any, one game, maybe two. Unless you're right next to the stadium, whatever. So I think that's. So that'll be interesting. So if they can find a way to make that work where the money's going to be, at least a little bit more normal, then I think we see more of a normal offseason. But if they still are well, we don't, we're not, if they still kind of cry poor and act like they're not going to have it, they're not going to have their money and they want to have another shortened season, but with fans, so that way they don't have to pay players and
they're making the money and they'll still get their playoff revenue like we did this year.
Yeah. So it'll just depend on what happens in that regard. It has the potential to be an okay offseason. Because I think also, I think what teams could and should do with new signings this year is just backload the contracts. And I know that, or at least, there will probably be more short-term contracts, so maybe 2 years, maybe a little bit less than what you normally would have made. But because, I think the players will be more apt to maybe take that a little bit of a pay cut.
Right.
We'll see what the owners want to do, because of course you'll have some owners that are well, I mean, I know he's already signed, but be Mookie Betts, we can only pay you $2 million a year. No, I don't think so. I don't think so, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and then to transition how odd of an offseason is going to be, even if you're not looking at the money and the fan side of it, I'll take the other side of it that's got me intrigued. How important. So if you're a free agent coming into this year, or after this year, if 2020 was your contract year and you had a shortened year, how much do teams look at this 60-game stretch?
True. Yeah.
I mean, we're Cubs fans. This core is coming up on. We got to re-up some guys. We got to who sticks around. So how important do you look at 2020 and going forward? I mean, obviously Chris Bryant didn't have the best 2020 year. How much are you going to hold that against him when you're talking of a future contract. You know, Javi didn't have his kind of Javi year. How much do you hold that against him? He's coming up for a contract. Whereas a guy like Ian Happ had a great breakout year here in 2020. Do you give him more than you maybe theoretically would have over 162 if his numbers had kind of flattened out? Maybe if after 162, if his 162 averages would have gone down, but in a 60 game stretch he looked really, really good. He looked like for part of the year a perennial kind of MVP level, like top all-star kind of guy. Do you pay him that? I mean, probably not, obviously, because you don't want to shell out too much money, whatever. But so just the offseason is going to look weird just because if you're a free agent this year, it kind of sucks, because regardless of how your 2020 went, if that gets held against you, it's not your fault that you only played 60 games and you batted 210. Well, yeah, but I only had a third of the at bats that I would have had. I'm sure last year everybody had a stretch of batting 200 for a third of the year or whatever.
Right.
Those numbers don't average out over 60 like they do over 162. So the offseason, just in general, is going to look really, really odd for a multitude of reasons, and layer after layer is going to get unpeeled, and it's going to be really kind of fascinating to watch it unfold.
Yeah, it really will be, an interesting offseason. We'll keep an eye on it here at the Crash Course Podcast. But before we move into some quick conversations, I know we're almost an hour in, but we still got to get to the ads.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and hit those ads, and we will be right back to talk about some Colts trade deadline talk. The Crash Course Podcast is brought to you by Anchor. Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Look no further than Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or mobile device, and will distribute it to other sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. On a budget, not only is Anchor completely free of charge, but will allow you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Anchor, it's everything you need in a podcast in one place. Even though this is a presidential election, there are many more candidates on the ballot. Ballot Ready is a nonpartisan guide to your entire ballot where you can compare candidates based on stances, biography, or endorsements. From there, you can save your choices to use when you vote by mail or in the voting booth. You can even request your absentee ballot or make a plan to vote early. This year, with changes to polling places and vote by mail laws as a result of COVID, it's more important than ever to have a plan to vote. This election matters. Make sure you have a plan to make an informed vote. Go to ballotready.org and enter your address to make a plan to vote today. We're ready to talk about the Indianapolis Colts here, which got a big win. I expected them to beat the Lions, but I didn't expect them to win by like 21 or 20, however many they won by. But
that's what happens when the offense can finally just kind of spin those wheels and really get going. So it was a good time.
And that's what B. Scott and I have talked about too, is the fact that their offense, had been struggling, and so eventually we expect their defense to have a little bit of a drop off, and their offense to improve. It's just where those will peak and where those will tail off. So it'll be interesting for sure to kind of track that and keep an eye on that. But let's go ahead. The trade deadline. If you're listening to this on the audio, we're on YouTube. It is Tuesday. It is today. But we still got a little bit of time before the trade deadline. So even though typically not a lot happens, at the trade deadline, at least not as nearly as much as it does for baseball. Yeah. Understandably so. You don't have a whole entire playbook to memorize and stuff like that. But I thought it would be fun to go into hot and cold and go into some of these trade deadline, deadline conversation for the Colts. And so what we're going to do is we're going to propose two trade offers that the Colts could potentially do. One we think is a hot one, which we think that they could potentially, would be a good trade for them to make, or would be one that's more likely to happen. And then a cold one, which is maybe less likely to happen, but is still one that should be on the radar for them.
Sure.
So my hot trade for the Colts, my hot take, is I think the Colts should trade Jacoby Brissett to the Cowboys for Michael Gallup. And the reason why is, we've talked about it before on the podcast where one of the places where the Colts need to improve is wide receiver. Right now they're kind of thinned out, especially with injuries, and now T.Y. is going to be out for a little bit. So, they need to improve the wide receiver core. Right now, it's really just Zach Pascal carrying the load.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a good trade. I think that because, as much as I wanted to be like Amari Cooper or CeeDee Lamb, like those are two guys that I feel like are kind of off limits. Exactly. So I was like, who's a wide receiver for the Cowboys who's pretty proven, but still not one of those big name guys? And I think that Michael Gallup could fit the bill for them, give them a little bit more depth, and be a good move. And the reason why I think Jacoby Brissett makes sense for the Cowboys is because obviously you got the injury to Dak.
Yep.
Andy Dalton, like as much as I love Andy Dalton and think he's underrated and he just gets kind of a lot of beef because he was under. He was under Marvin Lewis for the longest time, who clearly was there like 10 years too long.
Yes.
And you have the fact that he had AJ Green, who's diminished over the past few years. So like I think he's gotten more of a battle. Like he is in a spot right now, or should have been in a spot right now, where he has all the tools, all the talent, and he's still not performed. So, and you have Jacoby Brissett, who I think is an advantage for the Colts to have if you're going to trade your quarterback, because not only do you obviously the Colts have Eason as well, kind of waiting in the wings. They don't really need Brissett anymore, but also you make that trade, and Jacoby Brissett has shown you over the years that he can kind of be thrown into a weird situation and make the best of it. I mean, the NFC East is still wide open. Oh. So you can kind of maybe even concede a couple of weeks for Jacoby Brissett to kind of learn the offense and get into gear. Because, obviously traded to the Colts like a week before the season started, from the Patriots. And then 2 weeks before the season was told, hey, you're going to be the guy because Andrew Luck retired. Yep. So he's been in kind of those tough spots. And I think that would be a good position for him to kind of be thrown into.
Yeah, I really like that hot take, that hot trade, because all my points are going to be essentially the same points that you already hit on. The Colts obviously do need help at the wide receiver spot. Michael Gallup is not a wide receiver one, but a very solid 2 or 3 wide receiver, and that's really what the Colts need. They don't need to empty the farm out necessarily to go get Amari Cooper or to even go get a DeAndre Hopkins level guy. That's not. Obviously there's no harm in getting a guy like that. But right. That's not realistically not their most pressing need is to get that. But yeah, they just need some more depth. They need another reliable target for Phillip Rivers to hit. As we've seen Phillip Rivers start to kind of catch fire really here in these last few weeks. He has really picked up this offense himself. And so giving him another reliable weapon would be great. So it would really help out the Colts. And as you mentioned, Brissett is probably their most valuable trade chip at this point because it's the perfect situation for the Colts because he is valuable to other teams where he's not as valuable here in Indy. Obviously, he's a great human being and a wonderful teammate. Nothing absolutely bad to say about Jacoby Brissett. He's done a heck of a job in, as you mentioned, those 2 seasons where he was just kind of thrown to the wolves at the last minute and said, hey, take care of it. And he did what he could do. Started us out 5-2 last year before obviously getting hurt in Pittsburgh and everything kind of fell apart from that. But yeah, so he has obviously proven that he can step in, be a reliable starting option for you. And Dallas doesn't need, again, they don't need a superstar quarterback at this point. As you mentioned, the NFC East is still wide open. I'm telling you right now, that division winner, whoever it is going to end up with like 6 wins. On the pace that we're going. So Jacoby Brissett can get you 6 wins. Yeah. I don't care, So I think it is one of those trades that would be good for both teams, and it immediately fills both teams' needs right away. So that's a really good one. And it's just as you mentioned, Brissett doesn't hold nearly as much value in Indy as he would somewhere else because you've got Rivers here for this year and possibly the foreseeable future, and you have Eason waiting in the wings to theoretically take over that spot. That doesn't leave really any room for Brissett other than just, hey, being the guy in an emergency situation. And frankly, he's too good to be that kind of guy.
Right. And then as far as like the trade that I think maybe isn't as likely, but still one that I think could be a good one, the Cole trade, if you will.
Sure.
The Colts trade a 2021 third-round draft pick, their 2021 third-round draft pick to the Eagles for Alshon Jeffrey. Another, more of the receiver that B. Scott and I were talking about a couple weeks ago, kind of that taller, just go up and get it wide receiver as opposed to just kind of the smaller, faster guy. The Colts have the cap space to take on his contract. It's not an egregious contract either. It's just more than probably what the Eagles want to pay. The Eagles have been without Alshon Jeffrey for a good chunk of the season.
Yeah.
Already, he hasn't played in a while, so who knows when he's going to be back to full form.
Right.
You give him kind of a new, a new surroundings, that kind of thing, and then. I know I can hear him right now that B. Scott will be like, well, Chris Ballard doesn't want to give up that draft capital. Well, that's what I'm saying, and that's what I was bringing up earlier when I was talking about the Rays and Kevin Cash, in the sense that, like, sometimes you have to go against, not necessarily against what you typically do, but be willing to go outside the box and do that thing you wouldn't normally do, because sometimes that's what it takes to get what you need done. That's kind of the problem, like, not necessarily the problem, but the problem I had with, like, the Pacers head coaching hire is that it was just kind of the safe bet and not necessarily one that, like, was the one that they needed to go out and make. Whereas, and that's how I would feel about the Colts. They were to be like, well, we'd normally, they're like, well, we normally would go for that trade, but we don't want to trade any draft capital. Well, you know what? Sometimes you kind of have to go do that if you want to get to where you want to go and get the players you want to succeed. And, like, the Colts are a team that, I mean, they're 5-2. These next 4 weeks are going to show us what kind of a team they are. And if they, if they can add that piece and win, even go 2-2, go 500 during that stretch, you feel a lot better about this team going forward into the playoffs, where in a season where I know they're getting hot now, but the Chiefs have definitely looked beatable. The Ravens have looked beatable. The Steelers, we'll see how, we'll see how good they're going to be. I mean, obviously they're good now, but we'll see if they can keep that momentum up. But I mean, obviously the Colts are in a position to be a top contender in the AFC, so that be willing to make that move and say, yes, we typically wouldn't make this move in a normal year, but we have to go and try to make that move. So that's why, like I said, it's a cold take for that reason, because the Colts don't typically like to trade their draft capital, but it's one that I think it would be a good one for them to go out and do.
Yeah, and I mean, and to argue with theoretical B. Scott and with you, to flip that argument around is, I mean, if you want to sit here and tell me that Ballard doesn't trade his draft capital, I mean, he just did for DeForest Buckner. He gave up a first rounder, which imagine what it takes for Ballard, a guy like Ballard, to give up a first rounder. And I mean, and obviously that trade is working out. DeForest Buckner is incredible, absolutely worth the price of admission. So I mean, yeah, if a trade like that is on the blocks, and the only thing potentially holding a Ballard up is, I don't know if I want to give up my draft capital, he absolutely will, because he has shown that if he can give up a first rounder for a guy like that, he'll give up a third rounder if he feels it's necessary. He will make the moves that need to get done. I love me some Chris Ballard, I really do. So really quick, my hot and cold, since I kind of got this last minute, I don't have necessarily a full beautiful draft or trade scenario played out here. But my hot one is actually one that I have heard the last couple weeks. I don't know how I personally feel about it, even though it makes a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons. It's, hey, familiar trade partners when you talk the Colts and the Jets. Look at Sam Darnold. I mean, I know he's not, New York is New York. They're very harsh on their guys, even though obviously that whole roster needs help. Not even just, it's not all on Sam Darnold for why they look the way they look this year. But if Ballard feels like, not even necessarily that Rivers or Eason isn't the guy and Darnold is, if the price is right, look out for Ballard to make a move, to make a blockbuster move, if you will, and go get a young guy like Sam Darnold, who absolutely, still has essentially his whole career ahead of him. So that would be a very, very interesting move. And my cold one, man, you mentioned a trade with the Dallas Cowboys. I'll give you one that's probably ice cold, but it makes me smile just thinking about it. Finding a way to trade for a guy like Zeke, getting Ezekiel Elliott here in Indy. I mean, we've seen what he has done when he has a full, healthy, amazing offensive line that can run block for him. Not saying he can't do it without that, but seeing what he's been able to do in Dallas in the past, if you get him on a full roster here in Indy, I mean, I know obviously the running back room looks pretty good right now, but you have to think about the fact that, technically your running back one went down week one in Marlon Mack, and he's in a contract year, so I don't know if he's coming back, or what he's going to look like theoretically even coming back. So you have to obviously, like, you have to build for worst case scenario, and if you have a chance to get a guy like Zeke to just kind of pair with your room of Taylor coming into his second year at that point next year, and Wilkins and Hines and everybody, I mean, you fill out that running back room. I mean, really, you kind of close that out and build a formidable rushing attack.
Right, and I think the thing that goes for the Zeke argument is the fact that, like, yes, Zeke is one of the best running backs in the league, but at the same time, it's a position in the running back position that isn't as valued as the wide receiver position, and on from there. So like, even though, because trading Zeke, you would probably have to trade some draft picks.
Sure.
And that kind of thing, and I think that would be worth it, and I think that would be the reason why is because, okay, we're going to get Zeke, which is a perfect fit for us, gives us that running back, and gives us a good pass catcher out of the backfield as well, but also, we're going to, trade some draft capital, but it's going to be worth it, and it's for a position that, and Dallas would be giving up a position that, like, yes, it would be tough to let go of Zeke, but at the same time, maybe you need, they can still find another good running back that still fits their scheme, whatever.
Exactly.
And so I think that's what that kind of trade idea has going for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially, what it is it's as much as you're saying on one side, you're trying to replace one of, if not the top back in the league. I mean, as you mentioned, the running back shelf life is what it is. It's about 3.5 to 4 years on average. And I mean, it is what it is. NFL is a business first and foremost. Owners show us that all the time. Teams show us that all the time by cutting guys and making trades for fan favorites and sending them away because, hey, we got to, it's either pay them or ship them out of here. And more often than not now we're seeing that. So, yeah, it would be really interesting. Those would be some interesting trade deadline decisions.
Well, that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Chris, real quick, again, thanks for joining us this week. And where can we find you?
So, on Twitter, you can find me at Mr. Topher. That's Mister spelled out. Topher, Topher 92. On YouTube, I do actually have a channel with one whole video up. Since March. It's been fun, but that is 4th Gen Potato, spelled out again as well. FOURTHGEN POTATO. Thanks. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, for sure. And then remember, you can follow us at Crash Course FM on Twitter, Crash Course Podcast on YouTube. New video coming out on Friday, so you won't miss that. New Memory Lane. Crash Course Podcast on Facebook, where we do stream live every Monday. And you can also listen weekly on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. We again want to wish the best to B. Scott and his family. Hope we can have him back in the show next week as well. But do plan on having a podcast. If that changes, that's again another reason why you want to be locked in to the social medias as well. So we are hoping to be back next week with another podcast. But until then, have a good one, everybody.